Now, to begin with, we're getting you all the updates from the Israel-Hamas war. The war between Israel and Hamas militants in West Asia, it's reached Gaza's biggest hospital.
Yeah, and where thousands of people are trapped, and officials say that the lack of fuel has caused deaths of premature babies and critical patients.
Now, according to the World Health Organization, the largest hospital in Gaza, that's the Al-Shifa hospital, it ceased to function and fatalities among patients are rising as a blistering Israeli assault continues in the Gaza Strip.
The WHO managed to speak to health professionals at the hospital, and they described a dire and perilous situation, and it was not functioning as a hospital anymore, with constant gunfire and bombing exacerbating the already critical circumstances.
A total of 5 premature babies, 7 critical patients have died in Gaza's Al-Shifa hospital, and according to the Deputy Health Minister in Hamas-run Gaza Strip, they fear the death toll among patients will rise in the coming hours.
A doctor in the region said that the Al-Shifa hospital can no longer accept patients. Ambulances have stopped evacuating the wounded Palestinians and bringing them to Al-Shifa. And now, according to the medical staff, 40 Palestinians in the ICU face death if no fuel, water and oxygen is provided for them.
The situation overall is difficult. According to our colleague there is no water, no electricity. They cannot communicate between each other. There is a lot of targeting around the hospital. Kids and the infants, newborns in the ICU are facing death due to lack of energy resources. 40 patients in the main ICU are also facing imminent death if there is no fuel, no water or safe evacuation provided for them.
In Gaza City, the compound of Al-Shifa hospital has also been repeatedly hit by airstrikes. Hamas health officials say one of the strikes destroyed the cardiac ward on Sunday.
The situation now is very bad. We don't have connection. There is no internet. Sometimes we have some reason on the call phone. We're on the 4th floor, and also there's a sniper who attacked 4 patients from the inside the hospital. One of them has the gunshot directly in his neck, and he has a quadriplegia, and the other one, he has a gunshot in the abdomen. Some of the people which actually go outside the hospital, they want to go to the south, they bomb them also. They bomb the family from Al-Shifa hospital today in the morning. There is no electricity actually, there is no water, there is no food, so our team is exhausted.
In a video we were unable to independently verify, the Israeli army shared footage of troops leaving jerry cans of fuel outside the Al-Shifa hospital.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that the hospital had been offered fuel but had refused it, and the Israeli military said that it had placed 300 litres of fuel at the hospital's entrance, but Hamas authorities were preventing the hospital staff from collecting the badly needed supply. Although Shifa director has told journalists that the Israeli claims were lies.
And it's not just Al-Shifa hospital that has ceased to function. And according to the Palestine Red Crescent Society, the Al-Quds hospital, that's the second largest in Gaza, has also ceased operations due to a fuel shortage as Israeli forces continue to bomb the besieged enclave.
Sorrow, pain, anger, discontent and disappointment. These are our feelings today after we had to announce Al-Quds hospital in Gaza City is out of service. After a whole week of calling on the international community and the humanitarian organizations for the necessity to let aid come in urgently to Al-Quds hospital. The hospital was left to face its destiny on its own under non-stop bombardment, which put the lives of our medical staff and patients in danger. Today we say that the international community and all countries signing the Geneva Convention are fully responsible for the collapse of the healthcare system in Gaza Strip.
These are the horrifying scenes coming in from the Indonesian hospital in Gaza City that you see on your screens. A member of the medical facility was seen installing an LED light bulb amid a power cut at the facility, where doctors are treating injured civilians using flashlights on their mobile phones after the hospital ran out of fuel and electricity.
إصابة مباشرة في الدماغ ونزيف وفيش عندنا عمليات حاليا، لا في عمليات ولا أكسجين ولا كهرباء. قاعدين نشتغل يدوي، تنفس يدوي، إصابة واضحة بده عمليات طارئة عاجلة إنقاذ حياة. طبعا أقل من سنة عمر، قاعدين نشتغل شغل يدوي حاليا.
Now, according to the UN's humanitarian agency, 20 of Gaza's 36 hospitals are no longer functioning since Israel announced the complete siege of the Strip.
Palestinians continued to flee northern Gaza, and as they evacuated from a number of hospitals that were bombed, they say that they are struggling to find a safe place to be.
اللي عاش الحرب عاشها في مستشفى الشفا. مستشفى الشفا كانت كلها مشاهد مؤلمة. كان في أمهات بتفقد أولادها، شفت منظر الثلاجات، الشهداء فيهم، روائحهم طالعة، الذباب منتشر عليهم. كانت الأم مثلا، أنا شفت أم كانت جاي تشوف ابنها إذا مستشهد ولا لا، فلقت قدامها زوجها اللي مستشهد. كان وضع للأمانة كارثي. الله يعين الناس، ربنا المستعان.
As Israel's military pushed deeper into the dense urban neighborhood, Palestinians joined a growing exodus of people heading towards the south to escape fighting. Gaza officials say the Palestinian death toll from the war, it has now surpassed 11,000 people.
And a spokesperson for the Israel Defense Force said that on Sunday its troops were continuing to deepen raids into the heart of Gaza City.
עד כה עצרנו 20 מחבלים נחקרים שהבאנו אותם לחקירה בישראל. זה 20 שבויים שמתוכם גם כאלה שהשתתפו בטבח ב7 באוקטובר.
Meanwhile, negotiations to free the hostages taken by Hamas militants and other terror groups to Gaza are intense and ongoing as Qatar continues to mediate deal-making between Israel and Hamas. This according to multiple US officials.
And according to the White House president, US President Joe Biden spoke on Sunday with Qatar's Emir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani about developments in Gaza and urgent ongoing efforts to secure the release of hostages being held by the Hamas militant group.
Now for more on this, we're being joined by veteran lawyer and political analyst Stephen Golub, joining us live from California. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So now the health crisis, as we mentioned, in Gaza is deepening. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is adamant that infants can be evacuated despite there being no apparent safe passage at the moment from reports that we have read. What would you say at this point is the end game here? What are Israel's operations? Do you think these are justified at the moment?
Boy, the first thing I'd say is I almost wish you folks hadn't asked me to appear on your program today, because this is such a tough, complicated question. Nevertheless, I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. Look, if the hospitals didn't have military complex tunnels under them, why would these Hamas soldiers or militants or terrorists, you could say, be gathered around them and be so fiercely protecting them and fighting there? I think Israel does have a valid case, it seems, based on the preliminary information we have, verified partly by U.S. intelligence sources, that the major hospitals in Gaza City have been used as military bases, or rather the tunnels under them, the elaborate tunnel complexes under them, have been used to store weapons as command posts, as communication posts for Hamas. So I think Israel has, in a sense, a legitimate need to clear out that entire area, even though it's coming at tremendous cost. I think whatever guilt or responsibility we assign to Israel, we have to assign at least equal or greater responsibility for Hamas for doing something that many armies would never dream of doing: hiding in hospitals, using hospital patients and doctors and medical staff and nurses as human shields. So that's just a horrible situation. The end game, I don't think even Netanyahu knows. I don't think Biden knows. I don't think the Hamas leadership knows, because a lot remains to be seen. A lot remains to unfold. But in the meantime, it's a very ugly situation. In the short run, or the relatively short run, we may have some answers to at least one big question, which is Israel right in alleging that these hospitals really were, in a sense, despite the very legitimate purposes they serve, a physical cover for Hamas's military activities, and that Israel needed to clear out the militants, the terrorists, in order to move forward in even having a chance of eliminating the threat of another mass murder perpetrated by Hamas against the citizens and civilians of its state.
Mr. Golub, you mentioned about the civilians paying a high cost of this war, and I would like you to tell me about the international condemnation and continuous diplomatic efforts that seem to put pressure on Israeli side here, but it seems to have very little impact on ground. Now, what would you say the end game here is, considering that the scale of human destruction is at its highest and the humanitarian crisis continues to deepen? Any development on that front?
Well, certainly there's not in all countries, but in a number of countries around the world, there is condemnation of Israel. I wouldn't call it a consensus, a global consensus. I wouldn't quite call it that, but there does seem to be some strong opinion, obviously, in the Arab world, partly based on not just the realities on the ground, but that Hamas is better at public relations than Israel is. So you have that. In terms of the end game, I can tell you two things that have to happen for there to be at least a chance of a decent end game. One is that Hamas, this mass murdering terrorist organization, has to go one way or another. The other is that Netanyahu and his radical racist political allies in his government who have abused Palestinian rights, even much more in the West Bank than putting aside the recent fighting in Gaza, have to go as well. These are two fundamental obstacles to even having the possibility of peace, to having the possibility of a two-state solution at some point down the line. Right now, Israel seems determined to eliminate Hamas. Hopefully, the Israeli people will be determined, or will remain determined, as polls right now indicate, to remove Netanyahu and his radical allies, radical racist allies from power.
Right.
Whether either will definitely happen remains to be seen.
So also, Washington had first said that Israel had agreed to tactical pauses in this war. However, that doesn't appear to be the case anymore. What would you say are the prerequisites for there to be any sort of effective tactical pause? In fact, what would you say it would take at this point for aid, water, fuel to enter Gaza?
Well, there do seem to be, whether or not we call it a tactical pause, there do seem to be daily pauses in which some people are making their way south from northern Gaza to southern Gaza. That in and of itself is a horrible situation, but there do seem to be some, at least short pauses every day. And there are, the largest aid convoy coming into Gaza, I believe, came in today. Let's keep in mind as well that Hamas must have resources in terms of fuel, in terms of food, in terms of water to sustain its fighters. So it's not just a matter of bringing in to sustain its 20 or 30 or 40,000 fighters in Gaza. So it's not just a matter of bringing in resources from outside, as important as that is, but also Hamas could alleviate this situation by turning over its resources to benefit the civilians whom it supposedly is fighting on behalf of. Now, in saying all this, again, I don't want to sound like I'm not sympathetic to the Palestinians, and that I am sympathetic to the way the Netanyahu government in particular, and Benjamin Netanyahu, who's been in office for most of the past 6 years, have treated Palestinians. He's been a big obstacle to peace himself. He's presided over horrible abuses, particularly over the past year when he brought in very right-wing allies to his government. But I don't want to let Hamas go off the hook for its responsibility for what's going on, and even for the Israeli attacks that are trying to clear out the forces that perpetrated mass murders on Israeli civilians barely a month ago.
All right. Mr. Golub, thank you so much for joining us on World DNA. Always a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.